We've been exploring the idea of health. We've linked it to the experience of God, but we had to do a little bit of redefining of what that means, experience and God. And perhaps we're beginning to link it to the concept of fullness of life, rather than just the absence of pain or discomfort or illness. And it's taken us into various avenues of exploring the role of the physician and of the healer and of the carer and the relationship between us all. And we've begun to, we continue to keep the connection with meditation as a way that leads us into this experience that we enter into through what we call faith. And we've been looking at faith not as something distinct from belief, not opposed to belief, because having a belief system is not a bad thing, but faith itself is one of the things that constitutes our humanity, makes us human, and it's our capacity for commitment, for transcendence, and ultimately for love. So meditation we can understand in that sense as a way of faith that leads us into this experience through silence, especially, that opens us to a new perception, a new perspective on the meaning of health and our relationships. And we ended yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, with this image of the bell, this Chinese saying that if the bell or the gong is well made, then however you strike it, from whatever angle you strike it, it will emit a harmonious and pleasant sound, integrated sound. The idea being then that in meditation we are, as it were, refashioning the bell that we are as human beings, so that whatever kind of experience strikes us, we will respond to it out of this integral wholeness, this essential well-being that we find at the heart of ourselves. So, and then yesterday in our discussion, we listened to Patricia on the video talking a few months before she died with great joy and great peace, great vitality about what she had learned in that final year of her life and how she had been taught so much, and that was of the highest value for her, that she would willingly go through all the suffering again, she said, in order to learn. Not that she liked it, but she would be willing to go through it all again in order to learn what she had learned. So a completely different sense of health emerged from her witness, really. That here she was living life to the full, enjoying it, thrilling to it, excited by it, within a very short distance of the horizon of her physical life. So where do we go from here? I think it might be good for us to look a little more into the meaning of dying and death, because we can't really understand health without framing it within the meaning of death. In a certain perspective, death is the end of health. It's certainly the end of health care, or the provision of health as we've been talking about it. But is it really the end of health? certainly from what Patricia said and what our own experience of suffering can teach us, we could imagine that death is not the end of or the failure of health, but something that is contained within the mystery of life. Certainly, if we think of life entirely in an individualistic way, my life, my particular atomized existence, then death is the end of that kind of life, just as it is the end of life as bios, biological life. But if we think of life in terms of zoe, the other Greek word for life, then death is included within that mystery, in that experience of life, just as death is included within the life of a family. Members of a family can die, but the family continues. And there's a sense in which the life or the influence of the deceased member of the family continues, consciously or unconsciously, within the family, for good or ill. So we could say then that the fullness of life is full precisely because it includes death as part of itself. That it wouldn't be full unless it embraced and absorbed death. And that's not to diminish the finality of death or the exigency of death or the extreme nature of death. And if the fullness of life includes death, it also includes suffering. Everything, in fact, that we would instinctively and naturally prefer to avoid because it's unpleasant or frightening. Just as Patricia clearly stated that she suffered fear. We see that in who is there who does not fear death? It would be unnatural not to fear death. We see Jesus fearing death a few hours before he died. So the fear of death and the aversion to death is perfectly natural. In fact, if it were absent, we didn't see it, we might well say this is denial of death. However, it is also possible, we've all perhaps witnessed it, see it in Patricia, that we can go through that fear of death, work our way through it, can't just avoid it, but work our way through it, and then we emerge in a place where we can face death without fear. And that may well be an essential part of healthcare and of the healing process, to help people at whatever stage of life we may be meeting them, and we never really know. I mean, somebody comes to you with a headache, and it may be stress, or it may be, a terminal disease. So we never really know what stage of life we're at. But if we embrace the experience of death, which would include our fear of it and aversion to it, within our care, then the idea of health becomes something, I think, much richer, more humane. Our everyday identity, how we see ourselves on a day-to-day basis, is greatly changed by what we've been calling the experience of God. Just to mention to you, we were, at least I was asking, we didn't actually get into a discussion of this, whether our understanding of health is diminished by the way we exclude the idea of God from our consideration or our understanding. We need to have a certain definition of that term, the experience of God. But if we exclude the idea of God from our understanding of health, are we diminishing our very idea of health? So, anyway, through meditation, I would say, we actually do enter into that experience of God, whether we name it as such as not, or not. But that is what the experience of meditation opens up for us. And our everyday identity is changed by the experience of God. Therefore, we see meditation changing us. Nobody would meditate unless it were bringing about beneficial results. However we measure those or define them. The easiest way to define them, describe them, would be the psychological and physical benefits. And it's perfectly valid, but it's hardly complete. I don't think anybody who meditates and makes it part of their life and has really entered into the experience of it, so that it has become an integral part of your daily life, would say that the benefits of meditation, psychologically or physically, exhaust the meaning of meditation. Something more to it than that. This experience of God that we're talking about is the real direct thing. It's not mediated through an institutional version of God, or even a particular belief system. In the same way, our everyday identity is changed by a direct encounter with our mortality. So, when somebody close to you dies, of course, we are all reminded we not only suffer loss and grief, but we are also reminded of our own fragility. And when we have something wrong with us, serious or not so serious, our perception of the world has changed. I remember, going into a hospital with a friend once to get some results for his tests, and we got negative results. And when we came out, the traffic was flowing, and people were going into the shops, and everything was continuing bustling as usual. But our perception of it was completely different. The world was different. We related to it differently just by that reminder of our mortality. We were talking a little yesterday about how we see death, and perhaps how young people see death, how young children can be stunned by the discovery of death. How do you break the news of death? How do you explain death to a child who doesn't have the idea of forever? A child that can't seem to get its head around forever. And so you say to a child, somebody has died, and you say, okay, when are they coming back? So for them, death is a temporary state. The dead person will return like a cartoon character. So death is something that we come to understand through experience, through the evolution of our consciousness, and of course through an awareness that we ourselves are not immortal. It pushes us, as we come to understand the reality of death and what forever might mean. Not to say that we understand fully what it means, but as we encounter the reality of death, we are pushed into a more profound sense of who I am. It faces us with the ultimate human question of our own identity. The experience of God becomes more present, more meaningful through this encounter with our mortality. It raises questions and it pushes us into a new way of relating to ordinary life, to our relationships, to our work, to who we are. What we begin to understand perhaps is that this experience of God is not just my experience of God. It's not my ego experience of God. We begin to understand experience as something more universal than that which can be contained within our individual ego, our atomistic identity. We begin, as we were saying, to sense that when we talk about the experience of God, it isn't just my experience of God, but God's experience, the experience of God unfolding within me, and as something in which I participate. This is why we, I think, become concerned and attracted to the deeper meaning, to the question of meaning, as soon as we become conscious of our mortality. In the face of that mortality, our identity is placed in question. Who am I if I'm going to die and just be a fading memory in a family album? Who am I really then, if I am so mortal, so tangential, so fragile, so unpredictable? And in this encounter with our mortality, which is the basis of human wisdom and human transcendence, we may have a variety of responses. We may grab for a belief system that tells us in a simple way, yes, you will die, but you will go to heaven, or you will be reincarnated. There is, you don't have to worry too much about it. It's just like going to the dentist, and when it's over, you won't cease to be. So we may grab at a belief system that gives us an explanation or a consolation without fully understanding what that belief system means. And because we may need that. We may need to operate within a belief system to be able to explore the real meaning of it. But the belief system itself, the explanation of death, or what happens, if anything happens after death, what resurrection could possibly mean, we don't know that yet. It's not part of our experience. Nevertheless, it's not to be sneered at, and it may be an important part of our way of dealing with the crisis of our identity. Because gradually we could see that in the dying process we are being stripped down. Something is being reduced. We saw that, I think, also in what Patricia was saying. We fear that process of reduction. We are being reduced to something elemental, something essential, something simple. And we don't know if there will be anything left when the process of reduction is complete. So we quite naturally resist this process of dying. That may be what dying means. It's this progressive, relentless stripping away of all the familiar labels and layers of our social or ego identity. And all that we may have taken to be of primary importance in our life, our work, our career, even the things most precious to us, now begin to appear in a different light. We begin to have to prioritize, in a sense, or see what is of ultimate and what is of relative importance. That doesn't mean to say that everything is stripped of meaning. again, as Patricia said yesterday, what we may see is actually an enhancement of life. We find ourselves living, because of this stripping down, this reduction, living with death constantly before our eyes, as St. Benedict advises us, we actually find that life becomes more alive, more vital, more meaningful, more glorious, and more joyful. I had a friend once who went to the dentist, and the dentist was worried by some kind of something that he saw in his mouth, and said, I'd like to go and have a biopsy. So my friend lived for a week in the fear of this result, and he said he had never had such a joyful week, because all the things he was lying awake at night worrying about before, suddenly receded into the distance, and they were no longer, they were just trivial things. And so he said, I just, everything. I didn't complain about the weather. I didn't complain about the food. Everything was a revelation, and everything was thrilling. I loved my children. Everything was so beautiful and so glorious. He said, I, was still anxious about the results, but life had never been more alive. And he went back to the dentist, and the dentist said, good news, nothing wrong, nothing the matter with it. And immediately all his anxieties and obsessions came back. So, this total stripping of our identity may not be such a bad thing. And is it in fact what we're doing in meditation as well? Isn't meditation a participation, a conscious and voluntary participation in this mortality, or this actual dying that we carry around with us continually? We are alive and we are dying at the same time. And health is not the denial or even the negation of that dying process. Health includes that. How do we deal with our mortality, our dying? And does it help us to live more fully, more vitally? Or by the denial of death, are we actually drawing away energy and vitality from our life? Meditation, I think, psychologically speaking, at a simple level, lifts repression. The things that we run away from or deny because we're frightened of them, or they're unpleasant or painful, are readmitted into our conscious economy. We find ourselves accepting them, working through them. Not necessarily, I don't mean that we are analyzing them during the time of the meditation, but what needs to bubble up to the surface and needs to be addressed and acknowledged in conscious life, in memory, will happen. And that's why sometimes you find yourself thinking about, a period of your life 20 years ago or longer, and you wonder, why am I sort of reliving that relationship or those set of circumstances? And you just have to go through it. Now, if it were very extreme, you might have to have some help, but most of the time we go through that. It's a sort of natural self-healing, healthy immune system, in a way, looking after itself. If you need some help, you can get some help. If you need to talk about it with a friend, you talk it through with a friend. If you need to journal, you can journal. If you need a therapist, you can find a therapist. Depends on you. But generally speaking, it's a natural process which allows an unloading of the repressed or painful material back into the conscious mind, where it can be processed, remembered, and faced and assimilated, integrated. And of course, as that happens, the psychic energy expended in maintaining the repression and the denial is set free. So what do? You find you're more alive. You have more energy. And even the neurological research into meditation seems to identify this sort of a more highly energized state that happens as a result of meditation. So we can then see meditation as part of the healing process, continuous healing process, that allows us to be more healthy. If we think of health as living more fully, that means including as much as we can include, rejecting as little as possible, and expanding to our infinite potential, we would say. The paradox is that this fullness of life that we could identify with health is intimately related to the experience of emptiness. This is one of the great wisdoms of humanity. In the Upanishads, there's a famous verse, fullness is emptiness, and emptiness is fullness. This is expressed in the Gospels through the idea of death and resurrection. We spoke the other day about the Buddhist idea of emptiness as the nature of all things. Emptiness does not mean nothingness, however. Emptiness has a specific meaning. It means the impermanence of all things, of every form that exists, physical or even emotional. Every form is impermanent, mortal, and the other aspects of it, emptiness, is what? Yes, interdependence. So everything is interdependent and connected. Nothing stands alone, in fact. And that is such supremely common sense that we find it in all the great traditions under different headings. So in the biblical tradition, this is the meaning of a creature, surely. The creature is mortal, and the creature is part of creation, interdependent. So this emptiness in the Christian understanding is called poverty of spirit. Poverty of spirit refers to the Beatitudes, the first step of happiness, and health is usually associated with being happy. Even if you're dying, you can be happy. So health and happiness, the first step is poverty of spirit, emptiness. Poverty of spirit, happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God, fullness of life. So poverty of spirit is what we practice and commit ourselves to in a faithful way through the practice of meditation. It's, I think, very helpful and important to help people to understand from the beginning of the journey of meditation that they're making that this is what they will be encountering, so that they can understand that at times the meditation is going to feel like nothing is happening. Why do we meditate? We sit down to meditate because we want to be fully alive, we want to have an experience of God, we want to be happy. We have all sorts of reasons for meditating. And yet what we may find is it's like doing the washing, or it's like cleaning up the kitchen after a big meal. It's just one of those things you've got to do. And nothing dramatic or exciting happens. There's a famous Zen saying, before enlightenment, chopping wood and drawing water. After enlightenment, chopping wood and drawing water. we've been talking about the value and the breakthrough that happens when you realize that meditation has simply become part of your life. And that doesn't sound so exciting, but actually it's the sign or the expression of a big change in your life. It's no longer something you're trying to struggle with and trying to put into your life. It's just there. It has become part of it. So if you oversleep one morning, you will get the meditation is, everyone in my house overslept this morning. I was the only one to get up this morning. You know, it because it's part of your life, you try, if humanly possible, to do the meditation before breakfast. If you can't, you can't. But you also feel that it's like missing breakfast. And you're glad to get back into the rhythm of it as soon as possible. So, there's something so ordinary about meditation that it does need something ordinary and extraordinary, but something so ordinary that it does need some explanation. We need some encouragement, some level of understanding about what it means to get us to embrace the practice and allow it to become part of your life, which clearly it does for many people. Now, your motivation for meditation. You might say, well, I don't need to bother about all this stuff, and experience of God and faith and health and meaning and all that, you know. I can read books about that when I've got time. Meditation to me is a practical, pragmatic practice that I think will help me reduce stress, live more calmly, and improve my cholesterol and blood pressure in the process. That's fine. That's how you can begin. It's a perfectly good place to begin. But what we're talking about throughout all of this discussion and conversations we've been having is an experience, not a theory. In a sense, it doesn't matter what, I think it does, but in one sense, it doesn't matter what you think about meditation. You could think about it as a way of prayer, as a mystical practice, or you could think about it as a way of reducing your cholesterol and being calmer and more centered and better at meetings and all the other things. But the important thing is that we are entering into this experience, daring to call it an experience or the experience of God. But I realise that's a very loaded term, and I wouldn't do that, at the beginning of every introduction to meditation with every kind of group. But let's admit that might be a possibility of describing it. But anyway, whatever you wanted to call it, it is an experience you're entering into on a day-to-day basis. And I think that experience changes us. And it will, subtly and individually, change your own sense of the meaning of what you're doing, the meaning of the experience. And so, at some point in the practice, some of these questions will become useful questions, because you will want, let's say, to understand the experience and your own self-knowledge and self-awareness, the mystery of life and the mystery of your own identity will start to assert themselves upon you. And this is part of the the deep process of change that meditation brings in. I was also saying, I just remind you of this, I'm not saying that meditation is the only way we can have the experience of God. The experience of God is foundational. Health is natural. But meditation is one of those places, one of those sources of wisdom that, and I would say, love and death and birth are among the others, or great beauty. Those particular places or particular experiences that highlight or push us into, jolt us or prod us into a more fully conscious awareness. So it does help then to be warned that the experience that we're going to enter into on a day-to-day basis in our meditation is poverty of spirit, emptiness, which means a letting go. We know that through the very practice of meditation, the letting go of our thoughts, plans, memories, desires, day-to-day worries and anxieties, deeper issues in our lives. The time of meditation could be hijacked, and usually is hijacked, by other mental operations, like solving our problems. We had a seminar for business people recently, and I invited some of our well-known business personalities who are meditators to speak at it. And one of them is the founder and managing owner of the world's biggest hedge fund. So he was a real celebrity in that world. And he spoke very pragmatically about meditation. And then he said, and when I meditate, he said, I find I get sometimes these really brilliant ideas. I mean, really creative ideas. These are the sort of ideas that made him so successful. He also said, he said, like most people he thinks who are very successful, they didn't go into that field in order to be successful, in order to make a lot of money. They went into it because they were fascinated by it, or they enjoyed it. And then, as it happened, they were lucky and they were also successful. So it's the creative pleasure that it gave him. And what he was describing here was that in meditation he gets these creative, inspirational insights with regard to his professional work. And as he described this, you could see the audience sort of their eyes lighting up while they're in meditation. I'm going to increase my wealth and success. And I thought, oh dear, I thought he'd really understood meditation. And then he said, and this is a man who is not even religious, actually. He said, I got to let go of those great ideas in the time of the meditation. And I thought, thank God, he said that. And you could see that the audience was really mystified. And half of them, or maybe all of them, was really mystified with this. So this was a simple explanation. And he says, in one of his quotes that we use, whatever success I've had in life, I attribute to meditation. Well, it's a great headline catcher. Gets people interested in meditation. But I think, to be honest, as he is honest about it, we have to explain to people what poverty of spirit means. That the success is a byproduct. Let's say health is a byproduct. You will be a more healthy and happy person if meditation becomes part of your life. We could say that confidently. But it will take you through this experience of emptiness, stroke, poverty of spirit, in which you have to let go even of the desire for this health or happiness or success. So that's the art of teaching meditation in its true colours. Now, as I say, many people may not grasp that or want to grasp that. They'll think, oh yeah, okay, poverty of spirit, but I'm going to meditate and I'm going to become successful, or I'm going to solve all my problems. Well, one way or another, we run up against reality. And we have to encounter it for ourselves. Our own experience has to teach us. But it may be helpful, I think it is helpful, to be reminded or to be forewarned of what it is we're going to run up against. And then given some help. If we want to help people to meditate, then we need to prepare them for some of these things. And another dimension of reality begins to open up as we become familiar and live with this experience of poverty of spirit. Now another
Can I ask you something?
yes, please.
If say this business of people who are in that, the success area, poverty of spirit, and then they go back to their work, does it not lead to ethical behaviour? Or want you to divest yourself of everything like in the gospel? Would it not be poverty and, would it not be a more just society?
Well, I think so, and I hope so. And that's in this course that we're going to do with business MBA students next year. This is what I'm going to ask them to consider. The first thing I'm going to ask them to do is to commit to meditation twice a day as part of doing the course. Then we will deal with their failure to do that, because they won't do it, probably. If they do, then we'll have some problems maybe with. They'll all be double A type personalities. But anyway, then we're going to ask them to reflect on changes within themselves that meditation brings about, even within a short period of time. And then we will ask them to reflect upon the ethical considerations of this experience as they see their profession. So I think this would also apply to the healing professions. If a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a herbalist or a therapist did not think more deeply about their work and their relationship with people as a direct result of the practice of meditation, it would be rather strange. Again, I don't know whether I would say this, I might actually say to an MBA class on the first day, but I would be, this is something that I would believe, I do say, that if meditation doesn't make you a more loving person after 20 years, you can get your money back.
Get that underwritten.
Any other thoughts, comments so far?
You mentioned about twice a day, but obviously, and you mentioned about people oversleeping, sleeping in aspects of meetings in the morning that people might have suddenly find a 7 o'clock meeting or an 8 o'clock meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So in people's personal lives it's going to vary. And so therefore, times of meditation, surely, for practical purposes, they may not be able to spend the amount in the morning if they want to spend, or they can spend later on the day. And the periods of meditation, they might say, God, I can do it for 5 minutes now, or I can do it for 10 minutes now. How do you define a period of meditation? is it not, the person can switch off for 4 minutes. I mean, that's totally maybe as relevant for them for that period of time than it is for to do a 20-minute session and do nothing else the rest of the day, another 20-minute session. I mean, I just wonder your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, yesterday after this session, I looked in at school, and the teacher who teaches the meditation said, could we do a meditation period? It's the advantage of being a school on the island rather than in the middle of Dublin, I suppose. So I said yes. I said, how long do they meditate for? She had the bell, the little gong, and she had the timer, so they do it regularly. And when they do it with the little ones, they do 4 minutes.
Yeah.
But I asked them how old these kids were. The oldest was 12, the youngest was 8, I think. So we meditated for 8 minutes. And they were great, they were fine, there was no problem with them. So I think it's good to have a set time, a reasonable time, and a traditional time would be a minimum of 20 minutes. The reason for that is that it takes a certain amount of time for the cake to cook, the bread to rise. So we need a certain immersion period. And it may be, for example, this is very light, but for example, you may be meditating for 19 minutes and 58 seconds, and you feel the total distraction and agitation, and then you have 2 seconds of clarity and peace and stillness. Well, those 2 seconds, if you were measuring it, those 2 seconds would justify the whole 20 minutes. Now, I mean, it's a little arbitrary in a way to say 20 minutes to begin with and gradually go up to 30. But it works. Works for, I would say, the majority of people. Now, if you couldn't meditate you got up late, you couldn't meditate for 20 minutes, should you meditate for 5, I would say yes, do. If you say, okay, well, I'll just do 5 every morning, well, that would be better than not doing any every morning. And I think if you did, whatever you did on a regular basis, it's really the regularity, it's the diurnal rhythm that makes it part of your life. And as it becomes part of your life, the experience, remember, it teaches you, it's not an external teacher, but your own experience teaches you, and you will recognize without a lot of analysis that the 5 minutes is very good, but actually it should be expanded a little bit for optimum benefit, put it like that. So I think you will quite naturally find you'd want to make it longer. Similarly with the twice-a-day meditation, most people will begin with once a day and struggle to get the second meditation in. But if you get the one a day in regularly, you'll find that you will see the value yourself of ending the day with.
Yeah. People, like when you find that you do periods during the day as well, which might reflect for another 4 or 5 minutes out. I mean, would that be hard to people who do meditation, or would they restrict themselves to twice a day? I mean, to me, the Islamic custom is to do 5 times a day, and I think there's a lot to be said for a short period. That's, I mean, in my own personal prayer life, I would love to take 2 or 3 minutes out to.
Can I just share my own experience? I was off work for a considerable period of time. That's when I started meditating, and I took to it quite easily, and I had the time, and I got into a definite pattern of doing it morning and evening, and that became part of my life. When I went back into work, which is incredibly busy, it was a struggle, but I said to staff it was almost like going out of the house without brushing my teeth. I felt a bit, not exactly anxious, but I just knew I hadn't done something which I'd committed to doing, which is part of my life now. So sometimes, yes, I used to think I'm either going to be late or I can't fit it in, and so I tried to compromise and find 10 minutes, and I thought at least I've made that commitment, haven't given up completely. And like Laurence, I just think it becomes such a part of your life that you prioritise it. And it's like if you go out without brushing your teeth, you do feel uncomfortable, don't you? And you try and find somewhere to, brush your teeth after lunch or something. So for me, that's
Yeah, yeah.
The best way I can describe it. But I think I was quite fortunate. I was able to have quite a big hit to begin with, so it became part of my routine. But I do feel that's important to have that routine, because otherwise it just feels like everything else is a pressure of time.
So the mantra is like the toothbrush. But you carry it with you. So that is true though. I mean, I know a lot of people, and very busy people in the secular world, who will say the busier they are, the more they make time to meditate, because they know easily they would lose it and just get scattered.
But some people say take time to pray, and I mean the old system that we had in school is that you'd have the little short prayers, you would say, like the Jesus, Mary, and Joseph prayers, you know, and they're the kind of ones that people would use throughout the day, or as I say, the memorare to me, I say numerous times a day. To me, it's my lifeline, really, for good to meet you. So that,
I think the Jesus prayer.
Jesus prayer.
It's the same, exactly the same. It's the tikka of in Islam, mantra of the Upanishad of the Hinduism. So every religion has it.
Yeah.
And one of the advantages of the regular meditation, which was putting in as a discipline, in a way it's nothing new, it's morning and evening prayer. If you go to the standing stone in the middle of the island here, it's supposed to be right in the centre of the geographical centre of the island. You know, it's on a total east-west axis, so we go there on Easter Sunday morning every year, see the sunrise.
Yeah.
Wait till you see the sunset on it. So it's perfectly natural, even a biological rhythm perhaps. But what you'll find is that if you get that practice established in your life, you'll find that at other times, as I was saying the other day, you know, while you're waiting for the lift in the hospital, you know, imagine how much time people waste mindlessly in those sort of episodes of life. Or you spend, maybe this was Californians, maybe anybody else, you spend 2 weeks of your life in a car waiting at red lights. 2 weeks of your life. So I think you do experience that no time is wasted, and that when you find there's a bit of loose time, the mantra quite naturally rises in your heart. So by the time you get to the 14th floor, you know, you're refreshed. And you go into the next person you've got to see with a completely new frame of mind.
And we have a member of our group in Dublin who heard John Mayne talk way back in the 70s, I think, when he came to Ireland. And he said he was a daily mass goer. And he asked John Mayne, should he go to Mass or should he meditate?
Put him on the spot.
John Mayne said to him, well, I think you should meditate. And it ended up in the papers.
Oh, did it?
Priest claims meditation more important than daily Mass.
Meditate at Mass.
So he's still a member of our group 35 years later. And he tells us, he talks regularly about his meditation practice, and of course he just got up half an hour earlier. He still does daily Mass and meditation.
Can't you combine the two? Can't you meditate at Mass?
That's what he did.
A lot of people.
Just one short thing. I heard one time he said, when you wake up, and it really, I kind of thought, oh gosh, but it's really worked for me. You know what I mean? When you wake up and you kind of feel, oh, I've got 20 more minutes. But it's really, because it's kind of that time when nobody else in the house is up. And I actually go back into bed for around 10 minutes afterwards. But I really find it very helpful.
You get up. As soon as you wake up, you meditate, and you go back to bed for 10 minutes.
That's very monastic.
You'd be surprised how many monks go back to bed after the vigils. They're supposed to be sitting in their rooms for the end of the work. Okay. Well, this level of perception, this new dimension of reality that opens up through all of this experience, making it part of your life, is what we could call contemplative consciousness. And this isn't a cozy, safe, secure escape from the real messy world. This is actually a way of living in the world in a way that allows you to live fully without denying anything or running away from anything. And if you think of how many ways people under pressure today do run away, either with drugs or drink or whatever they do
Another
to...
woman.
Like what?
No.
Another woman? Another woman or another man? Okay. So there are innumerable ways in which we can privately or publicly escape from the pressures of life. But if we could live within the real world and not create an alternative reality, a sort of a second life like on that website, but we actually live this life with all its pressures and distractions and messiness, but we remain alert, we remain aware. We come back, there is putting this sort of dynamism of awareness and compassion. That the more aware we become, the more resilient we become. We're able to put up with a lot more stuff. And the deeper our awareness, the more compassionate we naturally become. Because awareness must lead us to self-knowledge, to our true identity, to our true nature. And our true nature is essentially loving or compassionate. So the more aware we are, what did you call that, Dr. Uma says? Situational awareness. So if the doctor or the carer is aware within every situation, they will naturally be more compassionate and more effective. So this idea of meditation is taking you out, as it were. Of course, in one sense, you have to take the phone off the hook and stop your emails and also stop the mental emails when you meditate. That's true. But it's a relatively small sacrifice of time on the altar of your true self, which brings about a perceptible new dimension of awareness and consciousness, a new way of perception. Your sense of priorities and values will change, inevitably. You could say that you recover a sense of original blessing. Life has its problems and its sadnesses and its stresses and anxieties. But we can live with those, even live with our mortality, even live with the idea that we're going to die before Christmas, and yet be healthy, be whole. And I think this is what the Gospel is getting at when we're told you will not enter into the fullness of life, you will not be healthy, you will not be whole, unless you become like a little child. So we have to recover at a higher level, obviously, this capacity for original blessing, original purity of heart, which really means purity of heart, happy for the pure of heart, for they shall see God. It really means that you see things as they really are, not through the filter of our ego, of our self-centeredness, of our fears, anxieties, or obsessions, or of our attractions and aversions even. We just see things as they are. That's this quality of a child that seems to give a child this incredible objectivity at times and dispassionateness, and yet also gives the child this quality of joy and wonder and immediate response to reality, which we, sort of, as we get older, we get heavier and less spontaneous and less responsive and less free because we've got all this baggage. So to recover that, and think of what that would mean in terms of sitting and seeing, 20 patients a day. Imagine if you were not trying to be compassionate, because probably by the third patient of the day you'd have given up. So you're not trying to be compassionate, you're not even trying to be aware and present. But because of this thing that has entered into your life, this little dynamism that comes in through the daily practice of the meditation, you realize that you are doing that. And you may not, you may or you may not be the first person to be aware of it. It may be the receptionist who tells you, mentions something, gives you a bit of feedback from what a patient said. Or just a look of gratitude that a patient gives you after you've spent an extra 30 seconds with them. Something like that, something very subtle and intangible perhaps, will make you aware of your own awareness, that you become more aware. And you'll make the connection. You'd be pretty dumb if you didn't make the connection with this new thing that you're trying to build into your life. Now, just to come back to death and the meaning of death. Death is the ultimate challenge to our egotism. The ego is about a psychological mechanism for separation, individuation. It begins at about 2 years old, isn't it? So it's when we begin to assert ourselves as different from, separate from, even those we're closest to. So the ego is a very natural and healthy psychological mechanism. However, every separation process that we go through, and we go through them continually, creates a certain level of anxiety and certainly leaves a certain scar or painful memory. Even the most natural and necessary separations can still hurt us. And some separations, think of a divorce, for example, are certainly not painless. So the ego is concerned with separation, but also concerned with survival. And it's the ego that says, well, that lion is heading directly towards me, so let me push somebody else in front of me, and maybe I'll save myself. So that's the egocentric vision of reality, and it's functional as far as it goes, but it doesn't go very far. It doesn't give us the full satisfaction of the human condition or the human experience of expansion, wonder. So anyway, in the face of mortality, the ego is really put under a lot of pressure. And the ego has to conform to reality. It has to accept that it also is mortal. So I think you could say then that when we meditate, we are actually entering into the dying process that is part of life. It's one of the reasons that many people will say, I think, that they are less frightened of death. They see death more holistically since they've been meditating. Doesn't mean that they want to die, or they don't have some natural fear of death, but they're no longer controlled by the fear of death. It no longer interferes with their capacity to live in a glorious way, in a happy way. So why is this? The reason, I think, is that when we do this work of poverty of spirit, which also purifies the heart so that we can see things as they really are. We are actually voluntarily entering into this natural death or natural process of dying that is part of life. So we integrate dying within life. So we no longer polarize life and death. We actually have felt the truth that we die in life. And after that, it's open to discussion. But you could say, and many people would say, I think most of the great religions would say, that this dying in life expands life, leads to a deeper, fuller intensity of life. So, I think it gives us, I think it helps us to link how we see death in relationship to health when we incorporate a conscious commitment to dying to the ego, let's say, into our daily life through the simple practice of meditation. And as the ego learns to accept this, accept its own mortality, I discover that I am a mystery, that my self-knowledge is critical to the way I live day by day. The kind of work and the quality of the work that I do and the quality of my relationships is going to be influenced by the kind of self-knowledge, self-awareness that I carry with me into the day, whatever time of the day I get up. And that this self-knowledge involves another kind of knowledge than that with which I'm going to be probably engaged for most of the day. The rational, analytical, planning kind of knowledge. But that this other kind of knowledge, which arises from stillness and silence, and the work of the meditation, and the self-knowledge is generated within that stillness and silence, then that other kind of knowledge and this more busy Martha type knowledge are perfectly compatible. They go together. You bring into your work, your analytical knowledge, your planning, your conversation, your arguing, your administration, your decision making. You bring into all of that the influence, the subtle influence of this other kind of knowledge. And that changes the institutions that you are part of, and it changes your professional persona. It must do, because you are a more real and a more whole, more healthy individual. Okay. Anyone got any thoughts that they would like to share? Any questions?
How do you know that you're self-aware?
Well, one of the Desert Fathers was once asked, what does it mean to be a monk? And he replied, it means that you ask yourself every day, what does it mean to be a monk? So I think being self-critical is one, not settling for any one image of yourself, being able to question yourself, and to be open to criticism too. I think the people who are not open to criticism from others, none of us really like it, depends how it's offered to us, I suppose, but if we're not open to criticism from others, it's a pretty good sign that we're not self-aware. But I would say your self-awareness is measured, if you want to say that, by the way others relate to you. I mean, certainly will affect the way you relate to other people, but you may not be quite so conscious of that. But it will change the way other people treat you. And if you're, for example, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who runs a big organization, and he said to me, where he gets very impatient and dismissive when he's under pressure of people who are failing, and or say they'll do something and they don't do it, or they mess up. And he said, I know I do, I get impatient, and he said, no, I don't say I've completely changed in that, but he said, my staff are much more forgiving of me and accepting of me. They just see it's part of my character. But he's noticed that, and I'm sure it's a subtle chemistry that determines all relationships. Really.
I suppose my own sense of how you know when you're self-aware would be, it's a bit like meditation. You actually have to be constantly critical, self-reflective, so you have to be aware and daily, be involved in some form of reflection on self after we say gather, particularly in the encounter with either one other or in groups, just to be aware of how, as you say, how people react towards you. But it's a bit like, it's a lifelong process. You have to do it constantly and constantly be aware, because we can get stuck, So we're not good judges of how
You can't see yourself.
No. But I think we have to be attuned to how others respond, or how we are responding in any situation and what's happening within us. So it's kind of an internal and external process, but it's ongoing.
I mean, if you were a manager, or you're in a position of responsibility, and you wanted everybody to love you, okay, you would probably be not a very effective manager, and you wouldn't be very happy in the work you did. Because there are times you have to say things and give instructions which will make people unhappy and angry with you even sometimes. Nevertheless, if you're coming out of a healthy place, a peaceful place and an undivided place, I think you would be able to fulfill those responsibilities in an honest way, and you would feel that there is love, even if it's not, popularity, but there will be a love there. No, not always, but depends on whether. But in a close, if you've got a close working environment, I think that would express itself that way.
Steve Jobs would never have made the iPhone if he worried about people loving him.
Who's that?
Steve Jobs would never have made the iPhone. He actually done a lot of tea. He did a lot of meditation himself. He spent a lot of time in India. And he practices a lot. Probably the point you made is probably how people put up with him at all, really. Because he probably knew he had a deep apart.
Well, he had the capacity to simplify it, didn't he?
Yeah, it is.
He produced beautiful, simple technique.
Is that, that's said and it's by, but the part definition of being self-aware is seeing others what God sees in you.
Yeah.
looking at everything as new. So every time you go somewhere, walk into a room, or every time you meet a person or do something, to look on it as something new, and then it increases your awareness.
Because it is always new, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Sometimes we forget, I think.
Yeah.
Just do that.
I mean, if you have one bad meeting, it all ends kind of unhappily and unresolved, and people are fighting with each other and feeling hostile to each other. When you get to the next meeting, you carry all of that with you. Or, I think you can cut through that and say, okay, be very open about it, and then say, but this is a week later. Forget all of that. We're going to come back and look at it again in a new way. But it needs someone with that kind of clarity to be able to do that. It doesn't have to be everyone feeling that or seeing it that way. But it needs at least one person who's prepared to risk it.